welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many people here tonight and some new faces as well. So thank you for joining us. Tonight, I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted to have Jill Jackson joining us to talk about the Big Exchange. Jill and I met, I actually think, despite the fact we speak a lot, I think we've actually only met physically once because of the last year, which is interesting. And I think it's fair to say, do you know, sometimes you meet women in our industry and suddenly there's an affinity and you're like, do you know what? You're like me. And maybe it's because we're Scottish and we both, we both worked at Standard Life. Or you were slightly different. We'll talk about your journey into financial services at some point. We just have, I guess, got on really well together, looking at doing some work together, all sorts of things. So and I really loved what the Big Exchange are doing, where their place is in the industry, what it's trying to achieve. So I was just really keen to get Jill on. And to talk to us tonight about what they're all about. But in true form, I always like to take this opportunity at the outset with any guest to just ask them a little bit about their journey into financial services and to give us a little bit of context and background to, to how they got here. And what we'll do is, clearly I will try my best to multitask, and if there are any questions, do put them in the chat and I'll try and pick them up as we go along. But equally what we'll do is open up at the end for Q&A, but happy to take questions as we go along as well. So Jill, first up, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves to the lovely ladies on the call this evening, and I think we have Martin as well. So lovely ladies and gentlemen, and to tell us first up, how on earth did you get into financial services? What's your story?
So lovely to meet you all, everybody. I'm Jill Jackson. I'm the CEO at the Big Exchange, which is a new investment platform. How did I get into financial services? Probably like a lot of people on this call, by default, not design. When I was at school, I loved school until the very final year of school. And then I thought, I cannot be bothered with this studying. I just want to get out and work for a living. I had this conversation with my mother, who was the first female in her family to ever go to university. It was a pretty big deal for her. And to say that she was slightly upset by my decision not to go to university was probably an understatement. So she made it very clear to me, you can not go to uni, Jill, but you're not leaving school without a job. So go and find a job and then you can come back to me. And I literally went to the careers office in school. I went to state school, not private school. So I'm another anomaly in the financial services industry, because most people in my position have been privately educated and have gone to university. And I spoke to the careers officer, said, I'm happy to get a job, pretty much doing anything as long as my mum, I just need a job to pass the test with my mum, that's it, right? Within a week, I had like 4 interviews lined up for various different companies in Glasgow at the time. And I got a school leavers job, like an apprenticeship type thing with Scottish Amicable Investment Managers, who were latterly bought by Prudential. And do you know what, it was such an amazing experience. It was a 2-year program. They did lots of training with you. You got to sit exams. I loved it. I just loved being in the office environment. It was a really small, I think it was probably when I joined, there was about 150 people there. And, you were sitting right next to the fund managers, and it was very different than the job that I left before I came to do the job at the Big Exchange. So, and over the years, I just, did lots of different jobs. I mean, I started out doing like customer services and pricing funds, like fund accounting, change management, like you name it, I would do it. And I didn't, I was never particularly ambitious in terms of seniority, but I was always really ambitious in terms of learning new things. So I always wanted to be, right, I've learned that, what else can I learn now? And I wasn't particularly bothered about the seniority or the label on the role. I was bothered about, did I know that yesterday? No. Will I know more about it next month? Yes. And that was really kind of the approach I took. I went through various, so when Scottish Amicable were bought by Prudential, I went to a company called Britannia Asset Management that was round the corner. It was literally a stone's throw walk away from where I had been. And yeah, that was another great company to work for, and went through lots of change, and eventually it became Ignis Asset Management that was acquired by Standard Life Investments, and that's how I found myself at Standard Life Investments. And I think throughout my career I was always really fascinated with why somebody invests. Like, why would my mum invest? Why would my dad invest? What was it for? Like, why, and what did they do? You know, what did it mean? What difference does it make for them? And I think that's something that I've always been fascinated by, and always, I mean, right at the outset, every retail customer I ever spoke to, it was always a man that I was talking to. And if it was a woman that had the investment, more often than not, they would put their husband on the phone to talk to me about their investment. And that always really baffled me. And then I probably, even although I was in the investment industry, didn't start investing myself until after, when I should have done. Even though I worked there and knew what I should be doing. And even now it kind of still fascinates me that my girlfriends like probably don't regard any themselves as investors and wouldn't. But then when you say to them, here's why you should, they're clearly, they get it at the drop of a hat. There's no difficulty explaining it. And I've always been interested in the other side of investments as to what else can it provide apart from financial return. So I was an early adopter of ethical funds, and I was always harping on it, various the companies that I worked for, to do more of that, and it not be seen as something that was like a sideshow. It should really be at the core. And in actual fact, when I spoke to investors that invested in those funds, they were all so engaged in their investment. They all wanted to know, that it hadn't funded, I don't know, tobacco, or hadn't funded arms, or whatever it may be. But now that conversation's kind of moved on, and they want to know, what good is it doing? Am I reducing my carbon footprint? Am I making a better future for my kids, for my grandkids, whatever it may be? So yeah, that's a kind of whistle-stop tour. But I think for me, it was by default I ended up in financial services, but I've never wanted to do anything else since I've been in it, I have to say.
It's really interesting. You probably raise a lot of points there that resonate with many of us on the call. For I guess most of us probably got here by accident rather than by design. I know I did. I'm a failed English teacher. I decided that wasn't what I was going to do, but what was I going to do? Mother's influence, there's a whole topic as well, because mine was similar in that, well, similar but different. I asked to go to university, and my mum said, no, you get married and you have 3 kids and get a job in the bank. So I clearly didn't listen to her. But it's very interesting, isn't it, how our parents can try and shape us down a certain path. I love the fact as well that you touch on the fact that for me, this industry has got to be about inclusion, and the fact that we don't have to go to uni or, a private school, or, have a maths degree to become a female in financial services. And I think, with International Women's Day having passed this week, I think there's been some fantastic discussions about women in the industry, and how we get here, and how we can shape and influence things. And I think your last point was really interesting as well. It did make me smile when you mentioned about where sometimes we don't always follow our own advice, in terms of, I kind of know I need to do this, and I'm kind of late to do it, and I'm great at telling everybody else about investing, but what are the state of my finances? So that kind of made me smile, because I don't know if anyone on the call feels like I did, that, to be fair, being fortunate enough to have a DB pension scheme meant that I didn't really take much notice of what was going on around me, because my view was, I'm going to stay at Standard Life for 40 odd years, and I'll get my nice final salary pension scheme, and that'll be it. And I think, as our career paths change, suddenly it's like, oh dear, I need to do something different here. So I think your history was really interesting. I see lots of stuff coming in the chat, so we'll pick up on some of that.
But Heather's going to be Prime Minister. That's all we need to know.
Oh, is it? Like, I'm rubbish. I need to get this up. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, fascinating stuff. So what took you then, Jill, from where you were to the big exchange?
What took me from there to here, so I worked at Aberdeen Standard Investments lastly, and I headed up their UK retail business, so the direct consumers that they had, which was about 130,000 customers. So my whole job, eat, sleep, breathe, was looking after them, from everything to what are we doing for them that's new, to are we properly looking after them and doing everything that we should to get the best outcomes for them. And at the same time, banging my ethical, sustainable impact fund drum that I took into every meeting with me, much to the upset of some of my colleagues sometimes. So yeah, my boss at the time, Campbell Fleming, was one of the founders of the Big Exchange. He had a conversation, so I don't know if anybody knows, but our co-founders of the Big Issue Group, and he founded the business essentially with the Big Issue Group and a number of others in the industry. And he said to me, Jill, we're doing this new business. We're going to launch this new business, and it's right up your street. It's everything you love. It's retail consumers. It's impact and sustainable investing. And, you know, if you're up for it, what do you think about being seconded to head up the business? I didn't even wait for him to finish the sentence. I was just like, yes, I'll do it, please.
I love that.
Not quite knowing what being a CEO of a business meant at the time, just being like, right, I love what it's trying to achieve. I totally connect to the mission in terms of trying to be more financially inclusive. You know, how can we reach people that don't currently invest and help them invest? How can we help people that do invest in a way that impacts society and the environment in a different way, so, or in a better way? So yeah, that was for me. I was sold immediately. And then I got the job. Before I asked, you know, how many people are in the team, and you know, what's the budget? Didn't ask any of those questions.
Love it.
Landed my first day and they were like, right, Jill, so your first job is to raise the money to launch the business. So that was but you know what, it's been absolutely like the most amazing experience for me personally, in terms of building something from scratch. I had done a lot of business projects before that were taking something from zero to completion, but never, you know, taking somebody else's idea that they had that was really precious to them and turning it into reality. And that's been quite the experience, I have to say. And really, I've learned a lot through that. And mostly I've learned that people do want to invest in this way. You know, people want to know that it's not just about a financial return, it's about more than that. But also that actually in our industry, there are a lot of people doing some really good stuff in this space. There's, you know, there's a lot to be celebrated, as well as, you know, people being called out for maybe greenwashing things or things not being quite as they should, but there's some really great stuff going on. So yeah, that's how I got there. I get given the opportunity. But like all of us, sometimes it's just sliding doors and chance, right? Campbell just so happened to be the founder of the business and spoke to me about it. So yeah, that's how I've ended up here.
I do love the fact that it's an influential man and an ally, because again, that's something I talk about all the time. It's like, if it wasn't for men recognizing talent in women, then many of us, and I'll put my hand up, wouldn't be where we are today. So, you know, that's a great story. I'm loving the stuff in the chat as well about what everybody did in a previous life, having confessed I'm a failed English teacher. So we're learning loads about each other tonight. So Jill, once you what's the kind of plans for the Big Exchange? You know, obviously, I think you've launched now. Yeah. What's the kind of, where are you now, and what's the next stages, and what are some of the challenges?
So for us, we launched, and we were supposed to launch in April last year, and I don't need to remind everybody the shitstorm that we were in April last year, where everybody was in their house wondering what the hell was going on. So we paused that and we went into a beta phase. So we had people that had registered interest. So we got 100 people on the platform and just spent a lot of time with them, understanding what they liked, what they didn't like. And we made some changes as part of that. And that was really, it was actually, we turned what was at the time felt like quite a negative situation into a pretty positive set of results, if you like, in terms of, by the time we launched, we'd made quite a few changes. And we're very much trying to be agile with that, in terms of co-creating the Big Exchange with our customers. You know, if they give us feedback that they don't like or want to change something, then we react to that. We don't just keep doing the same thing. What we want to do is be the recognisable brand for people to invest with impact in the UK. I think that we've got really strong credentials in terms of our founding partner in The Big Issue, and the societal impact that they make on a daily basis to people that are on, you know, suffering severely, even more so in the current situation. So yeah, we want to attract more customers to invest in, but it's not just investing for us. So that's what the offer is at the moment to customers, is to invest with impact. They can start from as little as £25 a month. We've seen real success across all demographic, age, geography, and values. So we've got young people investing for the first time. I think our youngest investors, adult investors, 19. Right through to people that are like my parents' age, early 70s, who are transferring assets from other platforms to us. So for us, it's about both of those things. And we concentrate really hard on not making our marketing exclusive, because that's something that a lot of the reason the financial services has ended up in the situation where lots of people aren't investors is that financial services is specifically targeted individuals for years and years, so that ends up excluding lots of people. So for us, it's about how can we make our marketing targeted but also inclusive for people, and that's quite challenging in terms of meeting all of those kind of requirements. It can be difficult sometimes. So yeah, for us, that the big thing is to attract as many people into investing as possible. When we launch our app, so our business is a browser environment just now. When we launch the app at the end of the month, it'll be free to download, and you don't need to open an investment account. You can download the app and link your bank accounts, and we've used open banking to help people categorize, budget, understand where they're spending their money, and help with improving your financial situation, even if you're not an investor yet. And for us, that's really key to unlocking the long-term potential of individuals and helping move them from not regarding themselves as an investor, but engaging them with their money in a way that will hopefully create that change in the longer term.
Sure. There's a couple of questions coming into the chat. I'm just keen to, before we go to those, to just explore with you the whole piece around social inclusion and the relationship with with The Big Issue, and the kind of wider piece around the purpose of the Big Exchange, in addition to obviously all the things that you've talked about. Are you able to talk to us a bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think for us, there's a number of things, right? Financial inclusion and social inclusion means something different to each of us, right?
Yeah.
And my idea of financial well-being versus Heather's versus Ruth's is probably completely different. My idea of financial well-being is being able to retire at a reasonable age. My son's idea of financial well-being is not ever having to work because you win the lottery, right? So it's a really different, everybody's got a different approach to it. For us, the social aspect of what we do is really important. It's something that we don't ever lose sight of. So everything that we do, how is it creating a societal impact? So it may, and that will range, that'll be a range of different outcomes. That will be, does somebody move their investments from a bog standard UK equity fund that's funding fossil fuels and harmful industries to the Big Exchange to something that doesn't, because environmental and social really are converging into one thing. So that's an immediate social impact for us if we can create that change and move the hearts and minds of an investor to that. In terms of the broader mission to include more people, again, that's an immediate social impact for us. If we can get people talking about money and it not be such a, because nobody really talks about that in the UK. It's like see in America, the UPS driver will be able to show you his portfolio on his phone, right? It's like, it's normal chat, right? It's not seen as like crass, or we don't talk about money, and that's weird. So for us, that's something that we really want to try and work with people on and create conversations about it. In terms of the involvement with The Big Issue, that certainly, I have to say, keeps you honest in terms of your societal impact and whether or not you're actually creating any, because they obviously have that exposure. So yeah, I think for us it's about, and really about being a good corporate citizen, and being a purpose-led business. We're in the process of applying to become a B Corp at the minute, which is quite an onerous process, but I would definitely advocate for it, because the types of conversations that process drives is a fabulous one, and one that shouldn't be undermined, because it creates a different set of behaviours for an organisation.
We had a great session last year, I think it was, with Anthony Villas, talking about becoming a B Corp. And I have to say, for me personally, and that was one of the best sessions I think we had last year. It was really enlightening. It was fantastic, you know, to hear him speak and the passion in which he spoke about his business and what he's trying to do. I'm going to start picking up on some of the questions here. Helena, you asked a question about pensions. Do you want to come on?
Yeah, I was just interested in your view on how we can get this into pensions a lot more, because it was interesting in the FCA Financial Life survey that came out that 24% of men read their pension statements and 12% of women. It's just interesting to see, even for men, how little we actually, or people actually engage with their pensions. And I think a connection that would be simpler for people to feel like their pension's doing something between now and 14 million years from now is having that impact investing. I wonder what you think of that.
Yeah, I do think so, and I think that I've got some pretty strong views in terms of consumer engagement on that, because if somebody sends you a pension statement, right, and you've got no concept of that the pension is even invested, you're probably not going to look at it, right? So there's an assumed level of knowledge that comes with a pension statement that I think is, for starters, not entirely correct. I think if you get sent out a pension statement and said, here's what your pension is funding, right? I gave you some examples of where your money's invested. I think that would drive an entirely different conversation. So for me, at the moment, it's all on the consumer to find out where your pension's invested, and it's not easy. I mean, if you want, Gillian, if you want to find out where your Standard Life DB pension is, good luck, because it will take you forever, right, to try and find out what's actually under the bonnet of it. So I think for me, that comes back to financial advisors having to do the ESG thing now. There's a lot of advisors that will say, nobody ever asks me for that. But if you told them what their money was doing, then they would take an interest. So for me, the conversation should be about, here's what your money is invested in. I had an interesting conversation with my sister-in-law the other week where she was ranting about Big Pharma profiting from the vaccine rollout, right? She was just saying there's just something really corrupt about that, you know, all these people in the world are suffering and Big Pharma's, you know, making all this money. I said, well, do you know what? It will all come back to you anyway, because your pension, a good bit of your pension will be in Big Pharma. And she said, I'm not invested in Big Pharma. I said, I can tell you right now that you will be invested in Big Pharma. You just don't know. And then I was saying, so all these horrible people that are benefiting are actually making a profit for you for your future. So I think that level of knowledge, Helena, is really important. So yeah, listen, I don't know if you've ever seen the Quiet Room video out there where it shows you going around and showing people where their money's invested, and they're like, what the hell? You know, I didn't even know it was. So I think there's two things. One, people need to know their money is invested. They need to know what it's investing. And I think what they're investing in would drive a better conversation than just finding out that it's invested in.
Yeah, it's a great point that we ran a session last year at Schroders. We had a number, it was about 100 odd very young women in to talk about their savings and investments. And we asked, and they were highly engaged. It was a great session, but we asked how many of you currently invest in the stock market, and about 3 hands went up. And then we said, how many of you have a pension? And I would say most of the hands went up. I was like, right, we're really sorry to tell you, you are investing in the market. But it's a basic but really important point. Ruth, I'm going to go to you. You've put a couple of questions, a couple of questions in the chat. Do you want to raise them with the group and with Jill?
Yeah, hi Jill. Hi Gillian, hi everybody. I love the comment you made, Jill, about being targeted but inclusive. And that's like the holy grail, isn't it, in marketing in many respects. And I'm just interested in knowing how you achieve that, and indeed if you have achieved it, or whether it's an aspiration that you're working towards.
So, yeah, absolutely, it is the Holy Grail, you're right. I think for us, it's about the customer experience when they arrive. So if the customer experience can feel that it's universal and you layer the information in a way that works for everybody, that's where the real magic happens. So I'll give you an example. We've just launched a new feature on the website for our existing customers, where they can actually look at a fund and x-ray right through it, see every company that they hold. You can flip a card over and see what that company does, like what is this company doing, you know, and the plans are to build in that. Now we are looking at who's interacting with that, right? But we've not pushed it in everyone's face. We've just said, here it is, you drill down if you want to find out more. Even when all the funds on the platform, we assess for their impact on the way in and award them a medal, gold, silver or bronze, depending on how much positive impact they create. Customers can either look at that, or they can drill down and find out, right, what is it doing for people and planet? Then they can drill down even further and find out what particular UN Sustainable Development Goals is it addressing. And I think for us, it's about striking that balance of the right amount of information to the consumer. In terms of connecting with them in the first place, with the marketing, it all comes down to where you're going, right? So I'll give you an example. You do an ad in Private Eye, you'll see a massive spike in traffic to your website, and you'll probably see more people investing larger amounts of money, right? Because their readership have got more disposable income. If I do something with an Instagram influencer, I'm more likely to get regular direct debit, lower value, higher volume in customers, but lower value in assets. And for it's about putting the same level of importance on both of those things. Whereas mostly for financial services, the importance, and historically, not so much now, has been on the, can I get the 250 grand ISA transfer? And I'm not really bothered about the millennial. And for us, we need to be as bothered about the millennial as we are about the person transferring the large pot of money, because that millennial is going to become somebody with a large pot of money.
Yeah.
I like that pyramid, or that kind of iceberg analogy. I think that works really well, isn't it? You're just giving people what they need. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Elaine, you had a question about the asset managers. Do you want to fire away?
It's really just to say, I know we're about to meet shortly. I work for Baillie Gifford, but I was just wondering what sort of engagement you've had with asset managers, and what you're looking for from them.
I think it's a combination of things. Elaine, at the very baseline level, we want the best funds on the platform, right? So in terms of positive impact, we want to be able to, so we had 40 funds when we launched. I think we've got 47 now. I'm really keen to grow that. That's, for me, that providing our customers and future customers with that choice of the best in the market is absolutely key. And I think it depends on the asset manager and what they want out of it as well. So we've got some asset management partners that work really closely with us, and, you know, will help it, you know, work with us on newsletters, on content, on, you know, they'll do dual marketing with us. And then we've got other asset managers that don't want to do that. So it really, for us, we're prepared to engage as much as the partner wants, but equally we're as prepared to be as hands off as well. For us, it's about, and a lot of asset managers don't have retail reach per se. They've got it, you know, once or twice removed, but they don't really have that direct retail connection. And I think in recent years, and with the massive increase in number of online DIY investment accounts, I think there's a realization that there has to be a kind of, you know, getting a bit closer to what's making them tick and what's driving their behaviour. And a lot of our asset managers really find value in that when working with us. So yeah, I'm like, we're kind of really flexible on how we work with asset managers, and they're all quite different in how they want to approach it. But ultimately, we want the best funds on the platform for the customers.
Joanne, you had a question about platforms. Do you want to come on? Welcome to the group as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just interested. Obviously, your proposition sounds pretty unique, but from a kind of platform perspective, do you see any competitors? So on one hand, you can say it's Hargreaves, but on the other hand, is it like a Nutmeg or something completely different in the platform world?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of DIY investment platforms out there and they're launching every other day. I think for us, first of all, at a business level, what makes us unique is that we're co-founded by one of the largest social enterprises in the UK, right? So I think from a brand and recognition point of view, that makes us really different. And secondly, I think that this is all we do, right? So we're not a whole of market proposition. We're very considered in the fact that we only want funds on there that are creating some kind of positive social and environmental impact. Now, there will be asset managers that are on our platform that also run other funds that don't do that. And I think for us, it's about providing that access to the best in class sustainable impact funds for those consumers. And I mean, I could say, yeah, I would love to, you know, have half of Hargreaves customers. Of course, that would be an easy route to me hitting my customer targets, right? But for me, if we don't connect with those consumers on the purpose of what they're doing and what they're helping achieve for the future, then I think it's a transient relationship anyway. I think our relationship with the consumer has to be on we're providing a really good customer experience, but the big thing is that they're connected with the purpose of our brand and the purpose of what their investments can achieve, because that's what makes people stay. Even if you look at ethical, sustainable outflows, when markets fall, they tend to be way less than traditional funds. And that's because people engage with what their money is doing. So it's a hearts and minds decision as well as a financial one. That's not to put aside the financial return, because that's the main driver for people investing, right? Is to get back more money than they put in. But for us, I don't believe that there are people out there just now that are connecting with people on that level.
No, it's about loyalty, isn't it? You're describing a sense of loyalty actually from your customers, a real engagement and belief in what you're doing, I think.
Yeah, I think for us, when we call it movement marketing, is about creating that movement around the purpose of what it is that you're doing. And it makes for more loyal, stickier customers. Joe, so I think we're really, that's something that makes us very unique. And you know, when you look at some of the stuff that's gone on in recent years, and you know, I don't want to get into Woodford too much, and also the fact that he might be coming back, but you know, things like that have been enabled by the way that the industry has behaved over the years. So I think for us, it's about really breaking that mold altogether and saying, you know, that's not what we're about. We're about providing access to the best funds at a reasonable price. And you can really make a difference to your children's future, your grandkids' future, your nieces, your nephews, the future generation. You can hold your head high. Yeah.
There's a question came in from Helena about the average age of your customer.
That's a very good question, Helena. And
she always asks great questions.
36. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I'm delighted with that. I'm also really delighted with the geographical split of the customer base, which is something that I've always been really felt quite passionately about. When you look at the disposable income in the UK, you'll not be surprised to hear that a huge amount of it's concentrated in the southeast of England. And the thing that I think, particularly over the COVID situation, a lot of people are sitting at home. There are a lot of people that are in very difficult situations. There are equally a lot of people sitting with money that they've never had before because they've not been able to spend it, right? So they're sitting with money thinking, you know, Cash ISAs have seen maximum outflows in the last year, 5 billion or something outflows, because people aren't making any money on it. And there's a risk to leaving your money in cash, right? There's an inflation risk. So I think for us, we are delighted with 36. I'll take
Yes.
that.
Absolutely. And your point on cash is really interesting. I've had the joyous task of reading through 222 pages of the financial services, or the financial let's call it the FCA. I can never remember what they're called. I'm so old. But their financial lives report. I don't know if anyone's read it, but it's got some amazing. Yes, Heather obviously has. It's just got some amazing data in it, and shows actually how we're becoming to some extent more polarized. But the amount of the increase in cash savings and the amount of cash that people have as a result of the last year is quite incredible. So,
Yeah.
but also, you know, that the regulator is continually saying, aren't they, in that paper and the one before Christmas about the FEMR and the RDR, about the harm that it's doing to people by sitting in cash. So,
Yeah.
you know, clearly there's opportunities to educate and then to obviously provide investment opportunities and solutions for them. Ruth asked a really interesting question about Worthstone. Ruth, do you want to raise that one? Because that was really interesting.
Thank you. Jill, I haven't come across the big exchange too much, but I am very familiar with Worthstone and the work that Gavin Francis and his team are doing kind of in the financial planning space. And I was just interested in knowing what are the similarities or differences between your two business models?
Well, I think for us, we're direct to consumer, and whereas they're offering some kind of wraparound advice, guidance, whatever it may be. We're an execution only platform where people are making their own decisions. So yeah, I'm not as familiar with Worthstone, but it's interesting, Ruth, because that's the third time they've come up in conversation today. So I definitely need to educate myself on them. But yeah, my understanding so far is that the big difference is that there's some kind of advice or guidance, whereas for us, it's very much we present people with information and we say, people that invest in this fund bundle are likely to experience this type of journey. If you feel that this reflects what you can happy to experience, then you choose this.
That's good to understand. Yeah, they are more. So I come from the financial planning world, and what Worthstone do, I crudely would put, is they put a first filter across the funds that are possibly on your platform and elsewhere in the kind of impact space to help financial planners make better decisions for the advice they give their clients. So similar but different. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. It's great. There's loads of questions tonight. I'm going to go to Heather because I believe you have a question.
Yeah, I sorry, I sent a private chat to Gillian, so I got one of my.
No, that's okay.
Absolutely,
she's got one in her back pocket, and I want to make sure everybody has a voice. Yeah, so fire away, Heather. On you go.
Absolutely fantastic. And I want to come back to something you mentioned about the B Corp, because it's something that we've been thinking about at Next Wealth, but when in our journey we do that. But the comment you made about the conversation that spurs and that drives change in and of itself is really, really powerful. The question I have is around the consumer. Are they moving all of their wealth, or is it a portion? Because we did a series of consumer focus groups, and I'm just trying to understand the appetite to invest according to values. And in the consumer focus groups we did it was last year, towards the end of last year, they were all active investors. Some of them advised, some of them direct consumer, and they were all familiar with some kind of ESG, ethical impact investing. But none of them had made any investments in any kind of specialist funds. One of them was on Wealthify and had been receiving lots of emails and thought, maybe I should look at doing something. But they kept coming back to these themes of, I have to reduce, I have to limit my diversification. I have to invest in a smaller pool of companies, and that adds risk to my portfolio. There was concerns about having to compromise the returns, that I'd love to do it, but actually really what I'm trying to do is secure my financial future, or pay for one of the consumers wanted to pay the down payment for her daughter's house, and I'd love to do good, but actually I'll do that through charity work. And the last thing was around credibility. That, you already brought up Woodford, but there was sort of not sure I can believe them. And I'd be really interested in hearing about do you hear objections to this, or the people that are coming to the big exchange just, I mean, they're really motivated and that's why they've come to you. So it's just sort of a different segment of the population.
So, I mean, they're all really good questions, particularly around the compromising returns, which thankfully now there's more and more data to support as the industry matures in terms of purposeful investment. There's more data to support the fact that that's actually just an urban myth. And also that there is risk investing in those industries that are becoming under increased regulatory pressure to transition and need constant financing to fund that transition. There's risks associated with those industries as well. So it is really interesting. I think for me, so every single investor, and I've just about spoken to every one of them, or one of my colleagues has, that we have, because I make a point of talking to them. The first thing I say when I say, why did you invest in the big exchange? What is it you liked about it? Is the first thing that they'll say is, well, I want more money back than I invested. For starters, right? So that's like the baseline. They're not saying, you know, I feel so great and worthy because I invested with the big exchange and you're co-founded by the big issue. That's not what they're saying, right? They're saying, I think I need to make money for my retirement for later life. So that's why I invested money. I want to know where my money is invested. And I find it really hard to find out elsewhere where my money is invested. So I like that I can get that kind of level of detail. But mostly what they want to move away from is funding stuff that in their ordinary spending life they wouldn't fund, right? So they wouldn't go out and buy fags. They've bought an electric car, but yet they're funding, you know, big oil companies and bad industries. So it's more about that I've changed this spending behaviour over here, but actual fact, and I've now discovered that the majority of my money is not even touching the surface of what I'm doing over here. So most people in society now are thinking about, how can I buy less plastic? Can I do all this? And I think it's about that alignment. And interestingly, in terms of shifting all their wealth, what we've seen initially, so we've got some customers that have been on here since July last year, and they shifted some wealth in the first instance, and they've moved more since. So it's like anybody, and I wouldn't expect, you know, a customer to immediately come, you know, 100% go all in with a new brand. That's quite unusual to happen. Investors are savvy, right? Consumers are savvy. They go, right, that's new. I'll try a bit of that, and then if I like it, I'll give them more. And we're not any different to, you know, anything else on that. But I do, in terms of the credibility of the funds, the assessment that we put the funds through is carried out independently. So it's by a company was called 3D Investing, now owned by Square Mile. So we've developed this methodology for the funds, but we don't do it. We give it over to them and they do it. And they've come back and say, right, we've assessed this fund and we've assessed it as a gold medal fund. It's creating, you know, it's got intentional positive impact for all the UN SDGs. Every decision they make is grounded in what impact is this investment going to make. So I think that independent assessment, Heather, is really strong on the credibility front, and that's tested really well with customers, both before we launched and now, because they feel some comfort that somebody's taking the time to look at it and really understand if it's doing what it says it's doing.
Great.
That's great, thank you. And that context of they've changed their spending behaviour, why not their investments? You're absolutely right. Yeah, really, really helpful. Thank you.
And the only other thing, just quickly, I would say on focus groups, having done so many over the years, is that see if you ask a group of investors, I did a whole load of focus groups a year and a half ago with women. If you say to them about investing in ESG or investing with impact, quite often there's a kind of quite a skeptical, what does that mean? As you say, am I going to compromise returns? Am I going to do that? When you explain what ESG is, for example, most of them kind of go, so what? Is that not what these guys are paid to do? It's like common sense, right? So ESG, I think the industry probably just needs to be a bit careful, because I think people expect more than that now. The more that we educate people on this stuff, the more they go, right, surely that's what you're paid. I'm paying you to do, is to do these things.
It's a really good point, that in terms of, you know, ESG becoming a kind of mainstream. It's just what we do, but it's all now moving towards how do we actually demonstrate impact. So I think we're all on a journey with this, particularly obviously the asset management industry, but clients as well. I had an advisor the other day was saying, you know, nobody's queuing up for ESG funds. I said, well, we wouldn't, right? Because it's just a way of analysing the companies that we invest in, and then what we do is decide what we're going to put into sustainable labelled solutions. So, but I think we're still on a journey, aren't we? Helena, you had another question about north, south, and geography. Do you want to raise that one? She's laughing now. You caught out. Put questions in your chat, and you're open for coming online.
Sorry, it was just popping in my head as you were speaking, because you were saying sort of most of the wealth is concentrated in the southeast. It's just interesting because I've had a couple of conversations in the last few months of people moving where their companies have now embraced flexible working, and they've sort of kind of said, well, if that's the case, I'm moving back home closer to my family, or I'm moving here because I only moved here for work. I wonder how that's going to change. I just think we're in for a huge amount of change. It's just interesting to see how that's going to go.
Yeah, I think for like, even for me as a company that employs people, I've got somebody in France, I've got somebody in the Midlands, I've got somebody in Scotland, I've got somebody in London. You know, we are all over the country, including in Europe, and that's not caused us any difficulties per se. I do think that we all definitely miss the getting together, right? But in terms of flexible working and your ability to work from home, I absolutely do agree. And not only that, I think it's a great way for companies to demonstrate that they're recruiting people from other deprived areas in the UK, and being able to divert employment into areas that ordinarily it would be very difficult to get a job of that nature living in that area. So I think it's a great way of, if I could be so bullshit to say, democratizing access to employment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating way as well, isn't it, of increasing diversity of in a number of different ways. But for me, diversity of thought is always really important. Yeah. And how do we encourage that? And I think, you know, what's happened in the last year has helped us in a whilst you wouldn't say there's opportunities out of what we've all been through, that there definitely are changes that have been driven by it that have got to be forces for good. So Jill, I'm going to ask you what's next for Big Exchange. What does the future look like? What's on your plans, if you can share them?
Well, I think for us, the big thing over the next kind of like 3 to 6 months, I would say, is getting the app launched, getting as many people downloading the app and engaging with their money as we possibly can, and understanding. I mean, I've got the app on test flight and was like horrified when I, you know, that way if somebody said to you, Jill, how much do you think you spend on takeaway food? You'd go, 50 quid, don't know, 50 quid a month. And then this app categorizes it for you, and you're like, oh God, that's really depressing. I would not think that I spend that much money on takeaway food. So, and it's brilliant because you can like set yourself targets, and it starts to like tell you, Jill, you're about to go over your takeaway targets. Move away from the Just Eat app, Jill. Move away. So yeah, that's. Although we have had few pleasures during lockdown, right? So takeaway food's probably the only one that we've got. But yeah, I think for us, it's about creating that engagement with money and driving more consumers onto the platform to make investments as well. So I think that, I mean, that's the only game in town for us, is getting more customers and more engagement in terms of money. I think that there's some obvious partnerships that we can make as well in the next 6 months that I'd rather not go into in detail, but they could potentially be really exciting in terms of creating partnerships that help people where they are, and not doing that whole traditional financial services thing where quite often we can be quite arrogant and expect people to come to us. How do we reach people where they are at a time that's relevant to them? And that's something that we'll really concentrate, and we'll continue to test and learn that, right? So in terms of marketing, we'll spend a small amount of money, test it. If it works, we'll do more of it, but we won't be chucking like a £5 million budget to go abroad and make a video to put on the television. That's something
because I guess clearly one of the challenges, isn't it, is you know, the cost of acquisition for direct to consumer platforms is high, and we all know that. So you know, what is that? I guess a challenge for you.
Yeah, I
Silly
think it will.
question.
Yeah, I think it will always be a challenge, customer acquisition cost for direct to consumer platforms, but mostly because the system's a bit rigged against organised companies, right? So I don't know how much you guys know about how this works, but basically, the more money you chuck at it, the more exposure you get, the more people come to your site, the more likely you're to get conversion, right? That's like the basic 101 of the funnel, the marketing funnel. And for us, the thing that we are really trying to concentrate on is how we just go to that middle level of the funnel to convert people. So we, for example, work with The Big Issue, and they're so Dennis Publishing that are the publishing partner of The Big Issue. We've worked with them in a number of publications that they run to do advertising through there, and that's been really successful. And that's things like Cycling Monthly. Any kind of health or tech magazine, we will get great response to, right? Anybody that is like, so for us, it's about kind of changing that conversation a bit and not going for that mass whole, like we did a trial with Experian on Facebook and Instagram just to prove out one way or the other how you know what works best. Yeah. And actually just constantly spamming people isn't really great for conversion. It'll get you lots of traffic to your site, but they didn't come for the right reason. They just came because you were harassing them, basically. And mission, right?
I love your honesty.
Yeah, so it's about getting the right people to your site, I think, at a time that they're actually interested in having that conversation. So yeah, for us, we've been thinking really innovatively about how we reach people, and we won't be going down that kind of traditional, like, assaulting people to get their money from them.
It's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because, you know, finding clients is a challenge all over the place. We did an advisor survey, obviously different from your business, but interestingly that we asked them about the key challenges going into 2021, and the top two were probably no surprise as regulation and PI, but the third one was finding new customers, and that really struck a chord with me because, you know, certainly in my years in the industry, in the last, probably since Pensions Freedom actually, I've heard fewer and fewer advisors tell me or talk to me about finding new clients, and then suddenly it was there. So certainly, you know, there's change in terms of trying to find clients and where they are. But back to your point, it's not just about finding people, is it? It's about finding engaged customers.
And I think the industry's got some evolution to do on that, because if we continue to see a rise in DIY investors and at the pace of change that we have, then it does present a challenge to the financial planning community. But that doesn't mean that financial planning isn't required, right? Absolutely. It just means that technology has created a disruptive point that means that more people are acting for themselves. But I do think that there's opportunities in the future. I've always been really interested in when DIY investment platforms, say I've got a customer that started off, like my nephew, putting in, I don't know, £1,000 and then 25 quid a month, right? Say he gets to like 35, decides that he wants to buy a house, has actually amassed a fair amount of wealth. He probably could do with some financial advice, right? Absolutely. But he feels maybe that he doesn't because he's on our DIY investment platform. And I think that there's some partnerships potentially to be flushed out in the industry there about how can DIY investment platforms and financial planning work together to have a more transient relationship when somebody does need financial planning, you know, at those inflection points where, I don't know, they inherit some money, they want to buy a house, you know, those types of things.
No, you're absolutely spot on, isn't it? It's not necessarily binary, is it? It's there's a fluid relationship, or potentially. So I think we'll all be really interested to see what you get up to next in terms of the big exchange. I'm conscious we have, according to my iPhone, about 3 minutes left. So if there are any last burning questions for Jill, we can happy to maybe take one more. Does anybody? No, I
If
take it
anyone
that's
thinks
been,
any after, feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to answer anything, no problem at
thank
all.
you so much. And I think it's been just a fascinating insight into Big Exchange and what you're, you know, what you stand for and what the organisation is trying to achieve. I think the partnership, we didn't probe that particularly, but the whole relationship with the Big Issue is an interesting one, because I guess, you know, that's under pressure. Nobody's carrying cash these days, and I know myself, you know, I sometimes like, how am I going to, you know, what do I do? Hand over my bank card? And you know, there's loads of challenges, isn't there, right across, you know, the population.
Yeah, you said something earlier about COVID creating some force for change that's good. And I think that there are real, like for example, iZettle giving all the Big Issue vendors an iZettle machine, right? Banks allowing Big Issue vendors to being able to open accounts with the care of address being the Big Issue. None of that would have moved at that pace if we didn't have COVID. So there have been some things that have happened that have driven change that actually, if we can keep doing them, will make a really positive impact. So I think that there's a huge amount that can be done. So yeah, and do you know, I'm just looking at Heather while I'm saying this and thinking, Heather, the last time I saw you, I think I was doing the reply from the lassies at a Burns supper that we were at. I'm just.
It all comes flooding back.
I'm sure that's what the last time I saw Heather. It's probably like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, or something like that.
Well, maybe we need to book you, Jill, for we could have a Burns supper next January for Wingham platforms. I think that'd be a fantastic thing to do. So ladies, all that's left is for me to thank Jill for being our guest this evening. I think that's been a great session. I've certainly enjoyed it. And I think hopefully everybody on the call has. It's been a great evening, and thank you for your time this evening. And maybe Heather, do you want to say a word about what's happening next month?
So I've got a call with a potential speaker this week. It'll be exciting, but I couldn't confirm it before tonight.
That's okay.
14th of April, so hopefully we're not going anywhere for any holidays in the spring. You can all
at some point, maybe this year, we will all be able to get together live. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Let's hold that thought. So I guess I may be standing between you and your dinner or a glass of wine or kids and family. So goodbye from Heather and myself, and thanks again to Jill for taking part.
Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.